Hi, this is Scott. I really appreciate our sponsors because they make the show possible. Today's show is sponsored by Developer Express. Become a UI superhero with Dev Express controls and libraries. Deliver elegant .NET solutions that address customer needs today. By leveraging your existing knowledge, you can build next-generation touch-enabled solutions for tomorrow. You can download your free 30-day trial at dx.hanselminutes.com. That's dx.hanselminutes.com. Hi, this is Scott Hanselman. This is another episode of Hansel Minutes, and today on the show we've got Brandon Bouier. He's an engineer at the Defense Digital Service, and you're calling me from the Pentagon right now. Is that true?
Yes, sir. It is true.
So you're like legit inside the seat of power right now.
I'm on one of the sides of the five-sided seat of power. Yes.
That's so cool. I read some spy novel, and they were talking about like the multiple rings within the Pentagon. Like, how many rings are you in right now?
There are 5 rings in the five-sided box that is the Pentagon, and the 5 floors. So I am on the 5th floor. In technically the D ring, which is the second to outermost ring. The outermost ring is the E ring.
I have no idea what any of that means, but it is impressive, and I appreciate it. Thank you so much for talking to me today. This concept of digital service, that phrasing or maybe that branding, that feels new, but I know that there have been IT people running around the government since the beginning.
Yes, you're right. It does feel new. And in many ways, it absolutely is new. The idea of a digital service, especially as it's represented by the United States Digital Service and us at the Defense Digital Service, is to try to bring, the private sector best practices of software development and technology to government to help make government processes that leverage technology much more efficient. I think it kind of is pretty genuine knowledge at this point that most government systems, from a technological standpoint, can stand to use some improvement. And so the digital services were created to foster doing exactly that. And so we try to bring in that technical talent that's working at the big name companies like the Googles, the Facebooks, the Amazons, the Microsofts of the world to come in and do what we call it's a digital tour of duty. Almost like a Peace Corps for nerds, almost, to come in and leverage their technical skills to try to see if they can make those same type of improvements within the government environment setting so that all citizens that the government serve can benefit.
That's really interesting. So, because we don't typically think of that being working for the government and certainly working in IT for the government to be glamorous. But if you've got a team with former Google employees and Shopify employees doing work on modern stacks, doing modern things, that seems much more compelling and pretty darn interesting, actually.
It's very interesting. Now, to be fair, not all of it's glamorous. Sometimes the things that we do are the things that a lot of people who do this for a living in the private sector take completely for granted. It's just assumed that you would have something like, for example, version control in your development environment, things like that. And then you walk into government and you realize people don't even know what that might mean in some cases. And so you do things that you would consider to be rudimentary or baseline, and they look at you like you're some powerful wizard. And then there are other times where you're truly, truly doing some pretty cool stuff. Or even if from a technical standpoint, it's relatively mundane. From an impact standpoint, it is just, for some people, it's the greatest thing they'll ever do.
Is it that things move slowly? And when they're moving slowly, what are you doing? Are you sitting around, or are you people always say that in government things move slowly. Are you saying that things like, let's say, continuous integration or a build server is a big deal, or that it just might be foreign to some branches of the government?
It's a little bit, from my vantage point, it's a little bit of all of the above. Okay. Things do move slowly in government. I am a little bit different from many of my counterparts here at USDS and DDS because I myself have been in government for about 14 years now, usually at the local and state level. And this is now almost a year and a half at federal level. So I'm familiar with how the government bureaucracy operates. And things do move more slowly. And there's a lot of processes involved. And so, yeah, it does cause things that would normally happen much more rapidly in the private sector for various reasons to take much longer. But it's also sometimes just a genuine lack of knowledge. The incentives are different. If a technology company in private sector does not innovate and keep up to speed with technology, they can find themselves quickly eclipsed or even going out of business by their rivals. Governments don't really have that problem. And that's a double-edged sword because it means that there's no strong incentive in many cases to continuously iterate and stay up to date with modern technology practices and procedures. So it allows software to tend to stagnate because, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And so when we come in, we face those bureaucracies because, like the old joke I like to say, governments hate two things: change and the way things currently are. So you'll hear people who are not happy with the way things are going and processes are a pain and systems are problematic and user interfaces don't work and applications don't talk to each other and data is not transferred. But you also feel a lot of resistance when we come in and we're doing things at a much faster pace, using more modern tools that they're completely unfamiliar with, and continuously engaging with users and getting their feedback when the assumption is you only have to talk to them once, and you go in the back room and build it and you're done. So it's a mixture of everything you mentioned, really.
Is it that, I'm assuming, because there's a certain amount of mystique around software that we don't understand, right? Like before I worked at a bank, the idea of moving money with software seems like such a bigger deal than, writing a blog. And writing software for government or for defense seems like almost scary in the, like, people's lives are on the line. This is a big deal. Like, software quality matters more. Is that an appropriate or a correct sense that I should have? Is there a certain amount of fear in, like, I don't want to mess things up, so we have to move a little slower with a little more determinism because this is such important work?
It's funny you say that because in some cases, especially here at the DoD, that's usually what gets passed on to us from the other folks within the government that we're working with. Like, this is a critical system. This is extremely important. We can't afford to run the risk of making changes that won't work. What if it breaks? Yada yada yada. And so you hear a lot of lip service paid to that. But then you peel back the onion a little bit and you see sometimes that the current system that is up and running is using outdated proprietary software that has long since passed its dates where it's being given regular security patches and updates. So it's extremely vulnerable. You see legacy systems that were maybe been homegrown by people who have long since left government and may have retired and aren't actually even being maintained, but are serving critical functions. But if that hardware goes down, they're absolutely SOL. So you see a lot of that. So you see that the systems as they operate do not necessarily reflect what they believe that they're doing. Oftentimes this might be to the institutional knowledge. Some person somewhere 15 years ago may have hacked something together in order to get the project done. And now, because it's operational, and that person's gone, it's become like, you can't touch that. That's the magic. And if you break that, that's over. And so that fosters a lot of resistance, especially in a world where you don't have modern tool sets or modern development practices, things like DevOps, automated builds, automated testing or testing period that doesn't involve a person clicking a button repeatedly, things like that. Those things that give modern developers this assurance that they can afford to make changes without breaking the whole thing, and they can afford to be a bit more daring and a bit more creative with what they're doing. When you lose all of that, you become much more rigid and much more focused on maintaining the status quo. And so a lot of what we do is in instructing and helping people understand that there literally is a better way of doing this, and bring that in. And we try to lead by example by either helping to inform them of the better way and showing them that way, and going so far as to actually do it and put it and show them, like, here's a finished product. Use that.
Yeah. The some of the things that the Defense Digital Service that you did that I would never have expected from any kind of government agency, for example, was like the Hack the Pentagon program. It was a bug bounty program. It was like the first one in the history of the Fed to go and say, the federal government to say, hey, let's go and do a formal bug bounty and bring the U.S. Department of Defense onto this HackerOne platform and actually have people, pay people to find bugs. This is something that you all did last year. And I'm surprised that they were able to go and like sell the idea, but it found 200 reports in the first 6 hours and paid off a reasonable amount of bounties. But certainly the value that was created out of that was, far outweighs any of the risks or the bug bounties that were paid.
Oh,
pretty
you're
innovative.
absolutely right. The value far exceeded. And that's why, first of all, you're absolutely correct. There was a not no, but hell no response with the initial plan to do Hack the Pentagon.
I appreciate your candor.
Yes. I mean, even the name Hack the Pentagon was hotly debated and resisted fiercely. Our director of DDS, Chris Lynch, was adamant about, keeping the name and making it happen. And this was an example of us saying, we're just going to do it. We definitely needed the top level support. We have been fortunate to have the full support of the previous Secretary of Defense, Ash Carter, and the current Secretary of Defense, James Mattis, who, they really believe what we're doing. The other top level commanders within the DoD believe what we're doing. And so you're absolutely right. There was a lot of resistance because it's just so different, so new. They were accustomed to paying exorbitant contracts to red teams and pen testers to do this work. I think they did right before we launched Hack the Pentagon and found, I think, maybe 20 vulnerabilities. And then we do Hack the Pentagon for, I believe, roughly an order of magnitude less money. And they find the first one within 6 hours and find hundreds of vulnerabilities. And so once again, leading by example, showing them how it's different. They can see it with their own eyes. And since then, we've done Hack the Army. We're currently, as we speak, doing Hack the Air Force. And there are plans. A new policy was developed as a result of the Hack the Pentagon approach. So now other government agencies are running their own Hack the whatever agency. It really has made a change.
Yeah. And what's exciting about that and what I was really impressed about from a transparency perspective was that they chose a live asset. They didn't make a honeypot. They said, okay, here's a live asset we're going to choose as the target for the hackers. Something that's, always under constant attack, but doesn't have anything, you're not trying to give away secrets or stuff. It's got no personally identifiable information, but it's still a real thing. It's like, if we're going to do this, let's not do it for fake. Let's do it for real. And it was like 13 minutes from the moment you launched it until they found a vulnerability, and everybody wins. The white hat, not the black hat, but the white hat, the good hacker who helps out, they get the ability to go and say, hey, I worked on the Hack the Pentagon hack. And then every other system that the Pentagon uses can then learn from that hack and improve its security. Exactly.
In fact, that was the reason why we were so adamant about doing against live sites, because believe me, they wanted to go against like a honeypot and everything. And we were like, no, because you're going to, the honeypot is not reflective of the actual live site traffic. You're going to try to fix things or put things in place, before as you built the honeypot. It's like, that's not how it would really work. This is supposed to mimic to a good extent what it would be like if a hacker actually was able to get into your system. And you want to understand that because you don't have good replication in your honeypot of what the actual production network is like. So we pushed on that. They agreed and they've been happy and pleased with the results so far. And the people who have participated in these events, Hack the Pentagon, I think one of the folks who participated was as young as 17. That person, along with others who found some critical vulnerabilities, were actually received challenge coins and met with the Secretary of Defense. Can you imagine that? I don't know what it would have been like if I met the Secretary of Defense when I was 17 years old because I hacked the DoD website. This is ridiculous.
Well, I think you'd rather meet them in person than but with bars between you and them.
Exactly. You're absolutely right. But it's been great, and it's been a great move. And like you said, it's kind of a win-win on all sides here.
Yeah, it's some pretty forward-thinking stuff. One other thing that I was impressed with is this experiment. I don't know how far this has gone, but the idea that if you go to code.mil, that domain, an MIL domain, military top-level domain, goes to a GitHub repository, which is an experiment that the DoD is doing to, maybe host some code on GitHub and start open sourcing. That's pretty impressive stuff. Is that driven from places like the Defense Digital Service, or how do people decide who owns what in these kind of situations?
Well, that's a whole creation of the Defense Digital Service, and it started with a very simple approach. We were simply asking a question as we were writing different pieces of code for different projects we were working on. We were like, how do we open source this code? Most of us leverage open source code all the time, as most modern day developers do.
Right.
And we are accustomed, and we use GitHub internally in order to keep track of our project work as we're doing. And so we're like, yeah, we wrote this code for this project, whether it was a snippet or a full-fledged application. We're like, how do we open source it? And we were fortunate enough to have a great general counsel, Sharon Woods, on our team, who loves to research things like this. She knew very little about open source at the beginning. She is now an open source expert now. And we come to realize a quick flaw, because we're thinking, oh, we just slap it like MIT or GPL license on this thing and release it. No big deal. Like you do anything you want open source, just pick your license. It turns out, as a government employee, you have no copyright. None. Any work you do in a government domain has zero copyright. So even, a very copyleft license like the GPL, for example, doesn't automatically apply, because even those licenses assume you have copyright. And so we said, oh, crap, this is not as simple as we thought. So we tried to figure out ways, and we were so fortunate to have a lawyer involved, because, oftentimes from a developer standpoint, you don't have a lawyer at present to give you advice on this stuff as you're trying to figure out how to license your software. And so we literally reached out to the Free Software Foundation. We reached out to the Open Source Initiative and, explained our situation and what we're thinking of doing. They got really interested. And so we came up with what we thought was a good idea to release the software. And we're thinking, hey, how about we actually put our process of how we're going to do this on GitHub and let people, like any other process, file issues and complaints about the way we're thinking of open sourcing software. And boy, oh boy, did we get complaints about our initial process. We got a lot of feedback, including some pretty good names in the free software and open source community. And we literally changed our approach as a result. And released a new version of our open source agreement. And we have since released a few pieces of software using the developer certificate of origin, and invite people to contribute, because private contributors, of course, have copyright, and we ask that they leverage the license that we provide. And it seems to be a very pragmatic approach that all parties involved go for, because we engage the community not just to contribute to the software. We engage the community to help us identify a good way that you can contribute to the software. And that was novel. So now we're working on trying to see if we can get more people within the DoD, because there are a lot of developers within the DoD who write software and would like to open source it. So we're working with them to see if we can get them out on the platform and develop what we hope is a community by which people who may not, work within the government but have technical skill can contribute to actual government used software, just like we would contribute to any other piece of open source software.
Mm-hmm. One of the things that you said that I want to kind of double click on, for lack of a better word, was you said it's a very pragmatic approach. And that seems really powerful. I mean, you're basically saying, let's leapfrog the time that we spent in government and maybe not being using progressive software technologies. Like the old style slow moving IT of the 50s and 60s and maybe the 70s is going to get leapfrogged. We're going to start using things like Git and GitHub. We're going to use open source licenses. We're going to reach out to the community, whether it be having them hack our live asset or whether it be opening up things for comment on GitHub or using GitHub issues. That's kind of very progressive, very thoughtful, very modern techniques. You saying you get pushback though, like you're getting pushback from people saying, well, this isn't how it's been done in the past. What are you using as metrics to prove that this is the right way to do things? Do you have, key performance indicators that you can point to keep senators from saying, shut this down or shut that down?
Well, we have different metrics depending on the different project. the overall strategy is what the founder of USDS, Todd Park, then CTO of the United States, said. And that is the strategy is delivery. And I agree with that 100%.
Yes. And success is the metric.
Success is the metric. We have qualitative and quantitative metrics. From a qualitative standpoint, it's simple. There are some projects that are done here at the DoD that literally the problem statement, defining the problem alone because of bureaucratic processes, can take a year and a half. And that's before you even start things like trying to create the actual requirements and then procure the software. By the time you selected all of this and they actually start developing until the time they're done, the software and the system is already out of date. I've had to remind people here at the DoD and the government that 10 years ago, smartphones didn't exist. And yet you have some projects that are going on longer than 10 years before they're even done. That's taking too long. So, our process is to just get stuff done. We literally have posters that say get stuff done, except it doesn't say stuff.
Yeah.
And we are always trying to get this thing in front of people's faces. We do the agile approach. We try to generate an MVP. I've been in government long enough to know that this is what works. You can say it's going to be done. You can tell people, pay the lip service all you want. Until they see something in front of their face, they don't really buy it or believe it. The metrics that we use vary. Like for the Hack the Pentagon that you mentioned earlier, the metrics were quite obvious and simple. It costs an order of magnitude less money to get an order of magnitude more vulnerabilities discovered, fixed, and patched. Mm-hmm. That's just self-explanatory. With one of the things we did for Transcom, where they had a system that helps military families move. It's actually move.mil. And there was a problem with the system and where it was actually having difficulties scheduling and coordinating people to be able to move when they're redeployed to a new location. And this was affecting not just the military members, but their families. We were asked to come in, and in 4 days, we were able to stand the system back up and get it to a point where it had much higher uptime, from about 80% to 99.9%. And it was processing many more move requests than it was before, thousands more. And so those are obvious metrics. And so we certainly have the quantitative metrics, but we also have the qualitative ones. And one big qualitative one is the fact that we engage with the users. This is such a novel concept to people in the government. It's sometimes astounding. Now, I am not a user researcher. We have user researchers who do this for a living on our team. I am not one. But even I recognize, because I do develop software, that, you need to continuously engage with your users. You talk to them, you figure out what their needs are, what their problems are. You get that MVP in front of their face, and you continually iterate with the user involvement to make things work. And from a qualitative standpoint, they are so happy with the result because they help make it happen that they are much more likely to use and enjoy the system than they would be if you talk to them once, or more likely, especially in a place like the DoD, you don't talk to the users. You talk to like the top level stakeholders in the chain of command. And then you go off to some facility somewhere and do all the coding there. And then you present them a finished project. And then that's when the users are engaged and they're like, what is this? This doesn't really do what I want. I guess I have to live with it now. And they're perpetually not happy with the software, which means the customers, aka the American citizens, are oftentimes not happy with the result.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I want to pivot a little bit in the time that we have remaining and ask you a question. When we met for the first time, we were chatting for a while, and was I correct in understanding that you've flown into war zones and deployed code and flown out?
Absolutely.
That's so awesome. Do you just like fly in and like go get push and then like bail, or how does that work exactly?
Well, one of the USDS model, the values, we call them our 6 values. One of the USDS values is simple. It's go to where the work is. Mm-hmm. You don't sit in your Ivy Tower and do stuff. You go to where the actual work is. And we at DDS, we're at the DoD. Our users are military personnel. So if we're going to go to where the work is, well, if they're deployed overseas, we go overseas. And so, yes, one of the systems that we worked on, the code is open source on code.mil actually, is we went out to Kabul. We were out in Afghanistan. And that's where we discovered that when we talked to the users and asked them what issues they're having, told them what we did and how we can help. And they said, you need to look at this software called ANET. And ANET is the advisor network. It's the software by which the NATO forces out there in Kabul are working to try to help stand up the Afghan government and show them, get them stood up and track the progress of how they're going. Things like, here's how you manage the money. Here's how you retain your own standing military. Here's how you do law enforcement. The basic functioning of a government. They are constantly meeting with Afghan counterparts in the government to try to help them get stood up and in keeping track of all of these engagements, who they spoke to, when, how was the meeting, what were the topics discussed, things like that. They were keeping track of this in a system that was quite frankly not really well suited to do so. And it was a proprietary system that they then heavily customized on top of. And they had one person on site who was tasked with trying to maintain this thing from a contract. And we came in and we understood this, and they said, you need to take a look at this because it is causing all kinds of problems. It was such a nightmare to use and search for existing meetings and things and engagements. And these are soldiers who rotate, every like 9 months or so, that they come in, and rather than be quickly brought up to speed by looking through the prior engagements of who they need to deal with, they can't find it. And so they could end up having to start all over or turn a positive engagement to a negative one and vice versa because they don't have this information. So we saw an opportunity to, in this particular case, rebuild the software. And we faced a lot of hurdles. I mean, in this case, we're dealing with NATO here. And our lead developer, who has a strong Java background, wanted to do a good chunk of the application in Java. And I mean, I remember sitting there and being told by a person at NATO that you can't do that. Java is not even on the approved software list. But like I said earlier, we built it. We did it anyway. We put a lot of work into it, and our top developers built that thing in about 21 weeks from scratch and got it in front of their face. And we met so much resistance until we showed it to them. In fact, I'm reminded so many times of the Gandhi quote, first they ignore you, then they laugh at you, then they fight you, then you win. We faced so much resistance until we showed it to them and they saw it. And we're engaging with the users out in Kabul the entire way. We're living in shipping containers, right there with them and constantly showing it to them. And you should have saw how amazed they were when we can do something as magical as listen to what they say. And when they say, hey, it'd be nice if we had an interface or input for this here. And then we go and we do it that night and check it in. We meet with them the next day and they see it and they're like, holy crap, you listened to us. Wow, this is a new thing. And it became adopted. NATO is now managing this system, the same system whose code you can see on code.mil. This is, revolutionary, but they saw it. And yeah, we went out there. It was a crazy experience, but one of the best of my entire life.
That is pretty awesome. How long were you there?
I was out there for about 2 weeks. Our lead developer was out there for the same amount of time the first trip, and then he went back out there for almost a month, and he was out there for a couple of weeks prior to that. We went in like 3 or 4 waves of people, and wrapped up the project. And our PM was out there for that last month as well. My particular task was, having to deal with actually migrating the thousands of existing, reports of meetings from the old system into the new one. This was on a secure facility on a secure network. And if you've never tried to interact with Java and parse XML across SOAP interfaces inside a secure facility where you have no internet access and cannot bring in your own electronic devices inside of the middle of a war zone, it is an interesting experience.
Yeah, you haven't deployed software until you've done that. Well, and you really have to understand, this is about understanding the users, right? It makes no sense unless you are in the environment where the user will be using the software.
Exactly.
Otherwise, what are you doing at all? You need to do it the right way.
For me, there's no better example of engaging with the users than that. There is absolutely no way we could have anywhere close to replicated that kind of user environment except for being there.
So where do you think that people should do who are listening to this show who maybe didn't even know that the digital service existed, that the defense digital service existed? Where should they start if this is something that they're interested in doing?
If a person's interested in lending their technical skills to help government, then you should definitely go to usds.gov and apply for the United States Digital Service. If you are very interested in working specifically with the DoD and the crazy stuff that we do here, you can make that known as you apply. We are an agency team of the United States Digital Service. There are other agency teams. We have a digital service team at the VA. We have one at DHS. We have a few. And so we are all hiring, and we can all use technical assistance. And this is a great way for people who think that there are improvements that can be made in government to help actually make that happen.
And these agencies, correct me if I'm wrong, these are nonpartisan agencies. These are government agencies that are important, and the work continues both before and after, presidents and senators and representatives come and go.
Absolutely. We're not doing this work to make presidents or senators or anyone look good. We're doing this work because we are American citizens, just like the people that the government serve. And we want to try to make this better for citizens. The work that's been done at the VA, for example, is work that directly helps veterans and their family members. The work we're doing at the DoD with DDS is directly helping servicemen and their family members. We did work last year at the State Department that was directly helping refugees. We are doing this because those type of problems persist and need to be resolved regardless of which party is in office. And so, leave the partisanship at the door. Come and help the people.
Very cool. Well, thank you so much for chatting with me today, and thank you for your service. And to our service members out there running your software, we appreciate them as well.
Thank you very much, and I really appreciate being on this.
This has been another episode of Hansel Minutes, and we'll see you again next week.